The smoke alarm screamed through the Havencrest Hotel at 5:47 a.m., but Ryan Hale was already moving. Former firefighter, single dad, broke. He had a job interview in 6 hours that could save his daughter's future, but first, he had to save a stranger's life. He kicked down the door, pulled her from the flames, and disappeared into the Chicago dawn. By noon, he sat across from his interviewer and froze. It was her, the woman from the fire, his future boss. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this incredible journey has traveled. The pre-dawn air in downtown Chicago carried that particular kind of cold that settles into your bones and doesn't let go. Ryan Hale felt it through his threadbare jacket as he stood outside the 24-hour diner on West Adams Street, nursing a coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. His phone screen glowed 5:23 a.m., 3 hours and 37 minutes until the most important interview of his life. He couldn't afford to mess this up. Not this time. The coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything riding on the next few hours. Atlas Innovations, operations manager position, $47,000 a year with benefits, health insurance, dental, a 401k he could barely wrap his head around. It wasn't the dream job, but it was a job that would let him stop choosing between Maddie's asthma medication and the electric bill. Ryan checked his reflection in the diner window. The suit was borrowed from his neighbor, Mr. Chen, who'd been kind enough not to ask too many questions when Ryan knocked on his door at 11 o'clock the previous night. It fit well enough, a little tight in the shoulders, a little loose in the waist. He'd shaved carefully that morning at 4 a.m., nicking himself only once on his jawline. The small cut had finally stopped bleeding. He looked tired. Hell, he was tired. Maddie had woken up coughing at 2 in the morning, and he'd spent an hour with her, holding the nebulizer mask to her small face, reading her favorite book about the brave little lighthouse until her breathing evened out and she fell back asleep curled against his chest. His mother had arrived at 4 to watch her, moving quietly through their small apartment with the grace of someone who'd done this dance too many times before. "You got this, baby," she'd whispered, squeezing his shoulder as he headed out the door. "You're going to walk in there and show them exactly who you are." But who was he really? A 34-year-old washout with a blown knee and a resume full of gaps. 5 years ago, he'd been somebody. Lieutenant Ryan Hale of Engine Company 51, the guy who ran into buildings when everyone else ran out. Then came the warehouse fire on the south side, the collapse, the surgery, the physical therapy that didn't quite take, the medical discharge, the divorce that followed like a storm he should have seen coming. Now he was just Ryan, just a dad trying to keep his head above water. He drained the last of his coffee and checked his phone again. 5:31 a.m. The interview wasn't until 9, but he'd left the house early. Too early. The apartment felt suffocating when he was anxious, and sitting still felt like drowning. He'd planned to find a coffee shop near Atlas Innovations, somewhere he could review his notes one last time, maybe practice his answers to the inevitable questions about the gap in his employment. "Why did you leave firefighting, Mr. Hale?" "Because my body gave out before my courage did." "What have you been doing for the past 2 years?" "Driving for rideshare companies at night, working warehouse shifts, selling my possessions one by one on Facebook Marketplace, trying not to let my daughter see me cry in the shower." He shook his head, dispelling the bitter thoughts. This was going to work. It had to work. He'd practiced his answers until they sounded natural, confident. He'd researched Atlas Innovations until he could recite their mission statement in his sleep. He'd even bought a new notebook, his one splurge, and filled it with thoughtful questions to ask his interviewer. Ryan tossed his empty cup in the trash and started walking toward the bus stop. His knee ached in the cold, but he'd taken 2 ibuprofen before leaving the house. It would hold. Everything would hold, just long enough to get through this interview, and the smell hit him first. Smoke. Not cigarette smoke or the pleasant wood smoke from a fireplace, but the acrid chemical stench of something burning that shouldn't be burning. His body reacted before his mind could catch up, every muscle tensing, every sense suddenly sharp and focused. He turned, scanning the street, and saw it, gray-black smoke billowing from the upper floors of the Havencrest Hotel, a mid-range business hotel that had been part of Chicago's skyline for decades. Ryan's feet were moving before he made the conscious decision to run. The hotel was 2 blocks away, but he covered the distance in less than a minute, his bad knee protesting but holding. The front entrance was chaos. A security guard was frantically speaking into his phone, trying to manage the handful of guests stumbling out of the lobby in various states of undress and panic. "Fire department's on the way," the guard was saying, his voice high and tight. "Please exit in an orderly." "How many floors?" Ryan grabbed the man's shoulder, his voice cutting through the confusion with the authority of someone who'd commanded scenes like this before. The guard looked at him, startled. "What? How many floors are on fire? Where did it start?" "Seventh floor, I think. The alarm started going off about 2 minutes ago. I don't know how many—" Ryan was already moving past him into the lobby. The smoke was thicker here, visibility dropping with each step toward the stairwell. His lungs, trained from years of running into burning buildings, recognized the particular burn of plastics and treated fabrics igniting. This wasn't a small fire. This was something that had been growing for a while, and the alarm had gone off too late. "Sir, you can't go up there!" The guard's voice followed him, but Ryan was already at the stairwell door, pushing it open. The smoke rolled down the stairs like a living thing, gray and thick and wrong. He pulled his scarf up over his nose and mouth, inadequate protection, but better than nothing, and started climbing. 7 floors. The elevator shaft would act like a chimney, pulling the smoke up. The stairwell would be clearer, at least for a few more minutes. If there were still people up there, and his gut told him there were, they'd be trying to get down this way. 2nd floor, 3rd floor. His knee screamed at him, but he pushed through. 4th floor. He passed 2 guests, a man and woman clutching each other, coughing as they descended. He directed them to keep their heads low, to move faster. 5th floor. The smoke was getting worse, hot and thick. 6th floor. He could hear the fire now, the roar of it, like a living beast breathing just above him. 7th floor. Ryan pushed through the stairwell door and into hell. The hallway was a tunnel of smoke and heat. The fire had started in a room at the far end. He could see the orange glow through the haze, flames licking out into the corridor. The sprinkler system was engaged, water raining down uselessly, creating steam that mixed with the smoke and made visibility even worse. His eyes burned. His lungs burned. He dropped to his knees where the air was marginally better and started moving down the hallway. "Fire department!" he shouted, his voice rough. "Anyone here?" A sound, faint, someone coughing. "Help!" A woman's voice, weak and desperate. "Please!" Ryan crawled faster, following the sound. Most of the doors stood open, guests who'd evacuated when the alarm first sounded, but one door halfway down the hall was still closed. He reached it and tried the handle, locked from the inside. "I'm here!" he called out. "Get away from the door!" He stood, stepped back, and drove his shoulder into the door. Pain exploded through his arm, but the door held. He tried again. Again. On the 4th impact, something in the mechanism gave way, and the door burst open. The room was a nightmare of smoke. He could barely see 2 feet in front of him, but there, by the window, collapsed against the wall, a figure. A woman, dressed in business attire, her face pale, her eyes barely open. "I've got you," Ryan said, moving to her side. She tried to speak, but it came out as just a cough. He assessed quickly, conscious, breathing, but not for long if they stayed here. The window behind her was jammed shut. She'd tried to open it. He could see the scratches on the frame, and smoke had been filling the room, stealing the oxygen. Ryan wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and pulled her up. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe the adrenaline made her seem that way. He got her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, the muscle memory returning as if he'd never left the job. She coughed against his back, her body shaking. "Stay with me," he said. "We're going down." The hallway was worse now. The fire had spread, eating through the ceiling tiles, dropping burning debris. Ryan moved as fast as he could, half running, half stumbling toward the stairwell. Behind him, he heard a window explode, feeding the fire with fresh oxygen. The beast roared louder. He hit the stairwell door with his hip, and suddenly they were in relatively clear air. The woman gasped, sucking in deep breaths, coughing violently. He kept moving down, floor after floor, his knee threatening to give out entirely, but somehow holding. The woman's grip on his shoulder tightened. She was conscious, aware, holding on. 6th floor, 5th floor. He could hear sirens now, close, getting closer. 4th floor, 3rd floor. The smoke was thinning. 2nd floor, 1st floor. Ryan burst through the lobby door into chaos. Fire trucks were pulling up, firefighters already deploying. Paramedics rushed toward him immediately, taking the woman from his shoulders with practiced efficiency. They laid her on a gurney, checking her vitals, putting an oxygen mask over her face. "Sir, are you injured?" A paramedic turned to Ryan, but he was already backing away. "I'm fine. Take care of her." "Sir, we need to check." But Ryan was moving, slipping away from the scene. He could hear someone calling after him, but he kept walking. The adrenaline was draining away now, leaving behind the shakes and the reality of what had just happened. He'd gone into a burning building, in a borrowed suit, 3 hours before the most important interview of his life. His phone buzzed, a text from his mother. "Maddie's still sleeping. You got this, baby? Call me when you're done with the interview." The interview. Ryan looked down at himself. His borrowed suit was ruined, covered in soot and ash, reeking of smoke. His white shirt had turned gray. His hands were scraped and bleeding from where he'd gripped the rough stairwell walls. His knee was on fire, and he was pretty sure he'd pulled something in his shoulder. He found a bench 2 blocks away and sat down hard, his body finally admitting defeat. He'd saved her. Whoever she was, he'd saved her life. But in doing so, he'd sacrificed any chance at this interview. He couldn't walk into Atlas Innovations looking like he'd crawled out of a disaster movie. They'd take one look at him, and security would escort him out. Ryan pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He should call and reschedule, explain the situation. But how do you explain that you ran into a burning building on the morning of your interview? It sounded insane. It sounded like an excuse, the kind of wild story a desperate person makes up when they can't get their life together enough to show up on time in appropriate attire. He stared at the phone for a long moment. Behind him, he could hear the fire trucks, the controlled chaos of firefighters doing their job. His old job. The job he missed every single day but could never go back to. His thumb hovered over the call button, and then he stopped. No. He'd come too far, sacrificed too much to give up now. He stood, every muscle protesting, and started walking toward the nearest target. It wouldn't open for another hour, but there was a gas station nearby with a bathroom. He could clean up as best he could. His emergency credit card, the one he swore he'd only use for actual emergencies, could cover a new shirt at least, if Target opened early enough. Maybe some wet wipes to get the worst of the soot off his face. The universe had thrown him a curveball at the worst possible moment, but Ryan Hale had spent his entire adult life catching curveballs and throwing them back. This wasn't going to be the one that struck him out. By 7:30 a.m., Ryan stood in the Target bathroom, looking at his reflection under the harsh fluorescent lights. He'd done the best he could. A new white button-down shirt, the cheapest one they had, now covered his torso. He'd scrubbed his face and hands until they were raw but clean. His hair, washed in the sink, was combed back neatly. The pants from Mr. Chen's suit were salvageable, a few spots of soot on the legs, but dark enough that they didn't show too badly. But he still smelled like smoke. Faintly, but unmistakably. And his hands, now that he looked at them in proper light, were worse than he'd thought. A deep cut across his left palm, probably from broken glass in the hotel room, had bled through the paper towels he'd wrapped around it. He bought a box of Band-Aids and wrapped it as best he could, but it looked obvious, ugly. He also bought a small bottle of cologne, the kind teenage boys bathed in before school dances, and applied it liberally, hoping it would mask the smoke smell. It helped. A little. Maybe enough. 8:15 a.m. Ryan sat in a Starbucks 3 blocks from Atlas Innovations, forcing himself to eat a breakfast sandwich he didn't taste. He reviewed his notes one more time, but the words swam on the page. His hands still shook slightly, the adrenaline hangover making concentration difficult. He thought about the woman. She'd been conscious when they'd gotten her on the gurney. She'd tried to say something to him, but he'd already been backing away. Would she remember his face? Would she wonder who he was? Probably not. She'd been in shock, oxygen deprived, terrified. He was just a blur in a nightmare she'd eventually try to forget. 8:45 a.m. Ryan stood outside the glass doors of Atlas Innovations, a sleek 15-story building in the heart of Chicago's business district. Through the windows, he could see the modern lobby, all polished marble and abstract art, the kind of place where people had careers, not just jobs. He took a deep breath. The smoke smell was mostly gone, covered by too much cologne and determination. His bandaged hand was hidden in his pocket. His new shirt was crisp and professional. He looked acceptable. Not great, but acceptable. This was it. Everything rode on the next hour: Maddie's medicine, their apartment, the chance to stop drowning and start swimming. Ryan pulled open the door and stepped into his future. The lobby was as impressive up close as it had seemed from outside. The receptionist, a young man with perfectly styled hair and a practiced smile, looked up as Ryan approached. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Ryan Hale. I have a 9 o'clock interview for the operations manager position." The receptionist typed something into his computer, his smile never wavering. "Of course, Mr. Hale. Please have a seat and someone will be with you shortly." Ryan sat in one of the modern chairs, more stylish than comfortable, and tried to slow his racing heart. Around him, Atlas employees moved through the lobby with the confidence of people who belonged. He felt like an imposter, like any moment someone would realize he didn't fit here and ask him to leave. 9:02 a.m. A woman in her 30s approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Hale? I'm Jennifer, from Human Resources. If you'll follow me?" Ryan stood, his knee protesting but holding. He followed Jennifer into an elevator, up to the 8th floor, down a corridor lined with glass-walled conference rooms. In each one, people sat around tables, engaged in discussions that probably mattered, that probably moved the world forward in small, incremental ways. "You'll be interviewing with our executive team," Jennifer said as they walked. "It's just a formality. Your resume was very impressive." Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice. His resume was a carefully crafted document that made 2 years of gig work sound like independent contractor experience and a medical discharge sound like pursuing new career opportunities. Jennifer stopped at a conference room near the end of the hall. Through the glass walls, Ryan could see 3 people already seated, 2 men and a woman, all in business attire, all looking at folders that presumably contained his resume and fate. "They're just waiting for Ms. Carter," Jennifer said. "She should be here any— Oh, there she is." Ryan turned to see who Jennifer was indicating, and the world stopped. Walking down the corridor toward them, dressed in a sharp black suit, her dark hair pulled back in a professional twist, was the woman from the fire, the woman he'd carried out of the Haven Crest Hotel less than 4 hours ago, the woman whose life he'd saved. She looked different now, composed, authoritative, completely in control. But it was unmistakably her. The same face he'd seen pale and terrified in the smoke-filled room, the same eyes that had looked at him with desperate hope as he'd pulled her to safety. She was 20 feet away, 15 feet. Her eyes were on her phone, typing something with quick, focused movements. 10 feet. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs. Should he say something? Acknowledge her? Pretend he didn't recognize her? 5 feet. She looked up from her phone, her eyes moving toward the conference room, and then their eyes met. Recognition flashed across her face like lightning. Her steps faltered just for a moment, and her expression shifted through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat: shock, confusion, recognition, disbelief. "Mr. Hale," Jennifer was speaking, but Ryan barely heard her. "Mr. Hale, I'd like you to meet Lauren Carter, CEO of Atlas Innovations." CEO. Not just an executive, not just his interviewer, the CEO. The woman whose life he'd saved was the person who would decide his future. Lauren Carter recovered her composure with impressive speed, her professional mask sliding back into place. But her eyes never left Ryan's face, and in them, he could see the same scene replaying that was playing in his mind: smoke and fire and desperate fear, and a stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere to pull her back from the edge. "Mr. Hale," she said, and her voice was steady, controlled, giving nothing away to Jennifer or the others watching through the glass. "Thank you for coming in today." She extended her hand. Ryan took it, feeling the firmness of her grip, the slight tremor that only he could detect because he was looking for it. "The pleasure is mine, Ms. Carter," he said, and meant it in ways she couldn't possibly understand yet. She held his gaze for just a moment longer than necessary, and in that moment, Ryan saw the question forming, the pieces clicking together in her sharp mind. The timing, the smell of smoke she must have noticed despite his cologne, the bandage on his hand, the new shirt that didn't quite match his pants. "Shall we?" She gestured toward the conference room, her tone perfectly professional, but Ryan caught the slight narrowing of her eyes, the assessment happening behind them. He followed her into the room, aware that the interview he'd prepared for, the careful answers, the practiced responses, no longer mattered. Everything had changed. In 4 hours, his entire world had shifted on its axis, and as he sat down across from Lauren Carter, CEO of Atlas Innovations, the woman he'd saved from a burning building, Ryan realized that fate had either just handed him everything he'd hoped for or set him up for the most spectacular failure of his life. There was no in-between. Not anymore. Lauren Carter's hand was still warm from their handshake as Ryan settled into the leather chair across from her. The conference room felt smaller than it had looked from the hallway, the glass walls suddenly too transparent, exposing him to the entire floor of Atlas Innovations. He could feel eyes on them, curious employees glancing in as they passed, wondering who the nervous man in the ill-fitting suit was, and why the CEO herself was conducting his interview. The 2 men and 1 woman already seated at the table introduced themselves: Marcus Webb, VP of Operations, Diana Chen, Head of Human Resources, and Thomas Brennan, Chief Financial Officer. Ryan shook each of their hands, mumbled appropriate pleasantries, but his attention kept sliding back to Lauren Carter. She'd positioned herself at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her expression revealing nothing. But he noticed the way her fingers drummed once, twice against the folder in front of her before she stilled them, the way her eyes kept returning to the bandage on his hand. "Mr. Hale," Marcus began, opening his folder. "Thank you for coming in. We've reviewed your resume, and I have to say your background is quite impressive. 5 years with the Chicago Fire Department, achieving the rank of lieutenant. That's no small accomplishment." "Thank you," Ryan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It was an honor to serve." "And yet you left," Diana Chen interjected, her tone neutral but probing. "Can you tell us about that decision?" Here it was, the question he'd practiced answering 100 times in front of his bathroom mirror. Ryan opened his mouth to deliver his carefully prepared response, but Lauren Carter spoke first. "Actually," she said, her voice cutting smoothly across the table, "before we begin the formal interview, I'd like to address something." Her eyes met Ryan's, and he saw the calculation behind them, the intelligence that had built a multi-million-dollar company weighing options and consequences. "Mr. Hale, I believe we've met before. Earlier this morning, in fact." The room went silent. Marcus, Diana, and Thomas exchanged confused glances. Ryan's throat went dry. He hadn't expected her to bring it up, at least not in front of the others. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "We have." "Where?" Diana asked, looking between them with open curiosity. Lauren kept her gaze fixed on Ryan, and he realized she was giving him the choice to tell the story or to deflect, to own what had happened or to pretend it was nothing. In that moment, Ryan understood that this was the real interview, not the questions about his resume or his career goals, but this, how he handled the impossible situation fate had dropped in his lap. "The Haven Crest Hotel," Ryan said, his voice gaining strength. "There was a fire this morning, Ms. Carter was caught on the 7th floor. Thomas Brennan's eyes widened. "Jesus, we heard about that on the news. Lauren, are you all right?" But Lauren didn't look away from Ryan. "I'm alive because Mr. Hale pulled me out of that building. He kicked down my door, carried me through a hallway that was actively burning, and got me to safety." She paused, and for just a moment, her professional composure cracked, revealing something raw beneath. "And then he disappeared before I could even ask his name." "You were there?" Marcus leaned forward, staring at Ryan with newfound interest. "At the fire?" Ryan nodded. "I was in the area. I saw the smoke and—" He stopped, unsure how to explain without sounding either arrogant or insane. "I have training. I couldn't just walk away." "You ran into a burning building," Diana said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. "On your way to a job interview." "I didn't think about the interview," Ryan admitted. "I just thought about whoever might still be inside." Lauren finally looked down, opening the folder in front of her. Ryan could see his resume there, the neat lines of his carefully constructed professional life. When she looked up again, her eyes had hardened with purpose. Mr. Hale, your resume says you left the fire department 2 years ago due to a medical issue. Can you elaborate? The shift back to formal interview mode was jarring, but Ryan understood what she was doing. She was giving him a chance to explain himself, to fill in the gaps that his resume couldn't, to show them who he really was. I injured my knee during a structural collapse, Ryan said. A warehouse fire on the south side. 3 of us went in to do a sweep before the building was cleared. The second floor gave way. I was lucky. I fell onto a pile of pallets instead of straight concrete. My partners weren't as fortunate. Were they? Marcus started to ask, but Ryan shook his head. They survived, but one of them will never walk without a limp, and the other had to have 2 vertebrae fused. I got off easy with a torn ACL and some ligament damage. But after the surgery and rehab, the department doctors wouldn't clear me for active duty. Too high a risk of re-injury, they said. They offered me a desk position, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. That wasn't the job I signed up for, so I took the medical discharge. And you've been doing what since then? Thomas asked, his financial mind clearly trying to account for the 2-year gap. Whatever I could to support my daughter, Ryan said simply. Rideshare driving, warehouse work, some security positions. Nothing that really used my skills or experience, but work that paid the bills. Your daughter, Lauren said softly. How old is she? 6. Her name is Maddie. She has asthma, which means regular medication costs, regular doctor visits. Her mother, my ex-wife, she's not in the picture. It's just me and Maddie, and my mother who helps when she can. Ryan hadn't meant to share so much, but something about Lauren's direct gaze made it impossible to hide behind the professional veneer. These people were going to decide whether he got this job, whether he could afford to keep his daughter healthy and safe. They deserved to know who they were hiring. The operations manager position, Marcus said, steering the conversation back to business, requires someone who can think on their feet, manage crisis situations, and coordinate multiple teams across different departments. Your firefighting experience certainly demonstrates some of those skills, but can you give us an example of how you'd handle a specific scenario in a corporate environment? For the next 20 minutes, they ran through standard interview questions. Ryan answered them as best he could, drawing on his leadership experience from the fire department and trying to translate it to the corporate world. He talked about managing teams under pressure, about making split-second decisions with incomplete information, about the importance of clear communication and trust. But throughout it all, he was acutely aware of Lauren Carter watching him, not just listening to his answers, but studying him, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he held himself despite the exhaustion that was starting to creep into his bones. He'd been up since 2 a.m., had run into a burning building, had scrubbed himself clean in a Target bathroom, and was now sitting in the most important interview of his life. His knee throbbed. His bandaged hand ached. The smoke smell, despite his best efforts, still clung to him faintly, mixing with the cheap cologne in a way that probably wasn't pleasant. Mr. Hale, Diana said, making notes on her tablet. I have to ask, and I don't mean this insensitively, but what happened this morning, running into that fire, does that indicate a pattern of impulsive decision-making? We need someone who thinks before they act. Ryan met her gaze steadily. With all due respect, ma'am, there was nothing impulsive about it. I assessed the situation, smoke pattern, building structure, probable time before first responders arrived, risk versus potential outcome. I made a calculated decision that I could get in and out before the situation became untenable, and I was right. Were you, though? Thomas challenged. You could have been killed. You could have become another victim that the firefighters had to rescue. But I wasn't, Ryan said, because I knew what I was doing. I spent 5 years in that job. I know fire, how it moves, how it thinks, what it takes from you if you give it the chance. I knew I had a window of time, and I used it. Oh, to save my life, Lauren said quietly. The room fell silent again, everyone turning to look at her. She was still watching Ryan, but her expression had softened slightly. You didn't know who I was. For all you knew, I was nobody important, just another person trapped in a bad situation. But you went in anyway. That's the job, Ryan said. Or at least it used to be. You don't go into firefighting because you want to save important people. You do it because you want to save people, period. Their worth isn't determined by their title or their bank account. It's determined by the fact that they're human, and they're in trouble, and you can help. Marcus exchanged a glance with Diana. Thomas was scribbling notes. But Lauren just nodded slowly, as if Ryan had confirmed something she'd been thinking. "Tell me about your daughter," she said, and the shift in topic caught everyone off guard. "What does she want to be when she grows up?" Ryan blinked at the unexpected question. She wants to be a veterinarian. She's 6, so it changes sometimes. Last month she wanted to be a dolphin trainer, but mostly she talks about helping animals. "A helper, like her father," Lauren observed. "I try to set a good example," Ryan said. "It's hard sometimes when—" He stopped, aware that he was about to admit to struggling, to show weakness in a job interview. "When what?" Lauren prompted gently. Ryan took a breath. What did he have to lose at this point? When I have to tell her we can't afford the field trip or the new shoes she needs because she's growing so fast, or the birthday party at the place all her friends are going to. When I have to choose between filling a prescription and filling the gas tank. It's hard to feel like a good example when you're barely keeping your head above water. The honesty hung in the air like a confession. Diana looked uncomfortable. Thomas had stopped writing. Marcus was studying his own hands. But Lauren's expression didn't change. "Mr. Hale," she said, "can you wait outside for a few minutes? We need to confer." Ryan stood, his knee protesting the movement. "Of course, thank you for your time." He walked out of the conference room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, aware of 4 sets of eyes watching him go. Jennifer, the HR representative, was waiting in the hallway. "How did it go?" she asked brightly. "Honestly," Ryan said, "I have no idea." She led him to a small waiting area with more of those uncomfortable modern chairs and offered him water, which he accepted gratefully. His hands shook slightly as he raised the bottle to his lips. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see the 4 executives in heated discussion. Marcus was gesturing emphatically. Diana was shaking her head. Thomas was pointing at something in his folder, and Lauren sat at the head of the table, perfectly still, watching them all. Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "How's it going, baby?" He stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. "Complicated," he finally typed. "I'll explain later." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, "You've got this. I believe in you." Ryan closed his eyes, letting the simple faith in his mother's words wash over him. She'd raised him alone after his father died when Ryan was 12. She'd worked 2 jobs to put him through school, had never once complained about the sacrifices she made. When his marriage fell apart and he found himself a single father with no job and no prospects, she'd stepped in without hesitation, watching Maddie when he had to work, helping with groceries when the money ran too thin, offering endless patience and love, even when he wanted to give up. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let Maddie down. This job, this chance, it had to work out. It had to. The conference room door opened. Jennifer stood, smoothing her skirt, preparing to either deliver good news or soften the blow of rejection. But it was Lauren who stepped out, alone. "Mr. Hale, would you come with me, please?" Ryan stood, his heart hammering. This was it. She was going to let him down easy, probably offer some platitude about his impressive background before explaining why he wasn't the right fit. He followed her down the corridor, away from the conference room, toward a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Lauren's office was exactly what he'd expected from a CEO, sleek, modern, expensive. But there were personal touches, too. Photos on her desk of what looked like family. An older couple, probably her parents, and several shots of her with a golden retriever. A bookshelf lined with titles about leadership and innovation, but also classic literature and poetry. A small plant by the window that looked well-tended. "Please sit," Lauren said, gesturing to one of the chairs across from her desk. She closed the door behind them, and suddenly the office felt very intimate, cut off from the rest of the company. Ryan sat, his mind racing through possibilities. She was going to tell him privately that he didn't get the job, spare him the humiliation of rejection in front of the others. Or maybe she was going to offer him a lower position, something entry-level that wouldn't pay enough to matter. Or, "That was quite a morning you had," Lauren said, moving to stand by the window, looking out at the city. Her back was to him, and Ryan couldn't read her expression. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Do you know what was going through my mind when I was trapped in that room?" She turned to face him, and Ryan was startled to see the emotion in her eyes, raw, unguarded. "I was thinking about my dog, Cooper. I got him 6 months ago from a rescue shelter. He's a disaster, chews everything, barks at nothing, absolutely hopeless at basic commands. But I love him. And I was thinking about how he was home alone, and how if I died in that fire, he'd be waiting by the door for me to come home, and I'd never walk through it again." Ryan didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. "And then you appeared," Lauren continued, "like something out of a movie. This man I'd never met, risking his life to save mine. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask my name or check if I was worth saving. You just did it." She moved to her desk, bracing her hands on its surface, and Ryan could see they were trembling slightly. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? Real courage? Real selflessness? I've spent 10 years building this company, working with hundreds of people, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen someone act without calculating what they'd get in return." "I didn't do it for a reward," Ryan said. "I know, that's my point." Lauren sat down in her chair, suddenly looking exhausted. For the first time, Ryan noticed the shadows under her eyes, the slight rasp in her voice that spoke of smoke inhalation. She'd been checked out by paramedics, probably told to rest, and instead she'd come straight here to conduct interviews, including his. "Ms. Carter," Ryan began, but she held up a hand. "Lauren, please. I think we're past formalities at this point." "Lauren," Ryan corrected, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "I appreciate what you're saying, but I need you to know I didn't come here expecting special treatment because of what happened this morning. I know that would be inappropriate," Lauren supplied. "Manipulative? Using a life-saving act as leverage in a job interview?" "Yes," Ryan admitted. "Then you should also know that's not what this is." Lauren pulled a folder from her desk drawer. Not his resume, but something else. "After we sent you out of the conference room, my team and I had a very interesting discussion. Marcus thinks you're overqualified for operations manager and would get bored within 6 months. Diana thinks your employment gap is a red flag and that you'd be a flight risk if something better came along. Thomas thinks your financial desperation makes you too high risk, that you'd cut corners to save money." Ryan's heart sank. He'd known it was too good to be true. "And do you know what I told them?" Lauren continued, leaning forward. "I told them they were all right. You are overqualified. You probably would get bored. The employment gap is concerning. And you are desperate. You said as much yourself." "Then why am I here?" Ryan asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Why bring me into your office to list all the reasons I'm not good enough?" "Because," Lauren said, her voice sharp now, commanding his attention, "I also told them that this morning I watched a man assess a crisis situation in seconds, make a life-or-death decision with incomplete information, and execute a high-risk rescue operation with precision and courage. I told them that man didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for backup, didn't calculate the personal cost. He saw a problem and solved it. And that is exactly the kind of person I want working for me." Ryan stared at her, afraid to hope. "I don't understand." "The operations manager position," Lauren said slowly, "is not the right fit for you. My team is correct about that. But what if I told you I've been planning to create a new position? Director of Safety and Crisis Management, someone who can oversee our security protocols, disaster preparedness, emergency response plans across all our facilities. Someone who understands risk assessment and crisis management not from a textbook, but from real experience. You want to create a position for me?" Ryan's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I want to create a position that this company needs and hire the best person for it. That happens to be you." Lauren slid the folder across her desk. "The salary is $65,000 to start, with full benefits, 4 weeks vacation, and a performance review after 6 months with potential for increase. You'd report directly to me, work with all department heads to develop and implement safety protocols, and build your own team as the position requires." Ryan's hand shook as he reached for the folder. $65,000. It was more than he'd made as a lieutenant, more than he'd hoped for in his wildest dreams. With that salary, he could get Maddie into a better school district. He could afford her medication without choosing between that and groceries. He could start saving for her future, maybe even take her on a real vacation someday. I don't know what to say, he managed. Say you'll take it, Lauren said simply. Say you'll bring that same courage and integrity you showed this morning to this company every single day. Ryan looked up at her, this woman whose life he'd saved without knowing who she was or what it would mean. She was offering him more than a job. She was offering him a future, a chance to be someone his daughter could be proud of again, a way to use his skills and training for something that mattered. There's one condition, Lauren added, and Ryan's stomach dropped. Of course there was a catch. There was always a catch. You have to promise me that you'll never, ever run into a burning building without proper gear again. I can't have my director of safety setting a reckless example, even if the outcome worked out this time. Ryan let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. I promise. Then we have a deal. Lauren extended her hand across the desk. Ryan took it, and this time the handshake felt different. Not the formal greeting of interviewer and candidate, but the solid grip of two people forming a partnership built on mutual respect and an experience that had bonded them in a way few people would ever understand. When can you start? Lauren asked. Is tomorrow too soon? She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Tomorrow is perfect. Jennifer will handle all the paperwork, get you set up with IT, all the standard onboarding, but Ryan... She paused, and her expression grew serious again. This morning, when you pulled me out of that fire, you gave me my life back. I don't take that lightly, but I need you to understand that this job isn't charity. I'm hiring you because you're qualified, because this company needs what you can offer, and because I believe you'll excel at it. If at any point you feel like you're not the right fit, or I feel like it's not working out, we'll address it professionally. This is a business relationship, not a debt I'm repaying. I understand, Ryan said, and he did. She was protecting both of them, making sure the line stayed clear. He respected that. And Lauren? Thank you for giving me a chance when most people wouldn't have looked past the gap in my resume. Most people didn't pull me out of a burning building at 6 a.m. on the same day as their interview, Lauren said wryly. You've set a very high bar for dramatic interview tactics. Ryan laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like months. The sound was rusty, but it felt good. I'll try to keep future interviews less eventful. Please do. Lauren stood, and Ryan did the same. Go home. Get some rest. Spend time with your daughter. When you come in tomorrow, we'll do a proper orientation, introduce you to the team, get you up to speed on our current protocols. And Ryan? Bring pictures of Maddie. I like to know the people working for me, not just their resumes. Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice. He made it to the door before turning back. Lauren, I know you said this isn't about debt or charity, but I need you to know I won't let you down. This job, this chance you're giving me, I'm going to prove you made the right decision. I know you will, Lauren said. Now go. You have a 6-year-old who probably wants to hear about her dad's very exciting morning. Ryan walked out of the office, through the corridor, past the conference room where Marcus, Diana, and Thomas were still gathered, past Jennifer at her desk, into the elevator, through the lobby, and out onto the Chicago sidewalk before his legs finally gave out. He leaned against the building, sliding down until he was sitting on the cold concrete, and let himself cry, big, gasping sobs of relief and joy and sheer, overwhelming gratitude that for once, just once, the universe had decided to give instead of take. People walked past, giving him strange looks, but Ryan didn't care. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called his mother. Baby? Her voice was anxious. How did it... I got it, Mama, Ryan said through his tears. I got the job. A better job than I applied for, $65,000 a year with full benefits. The sound his mother made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Oh, Ryan, oh, baby, I'm so proud of you. I'm so... Her voice broke. You did it. You really did it. Can you keep Maddie for a few more hours? Ryan asked. I need to go buy her something special. Maybe that dollhouse she's been wanting, the one from the toy store on 5th. You go ahead, baby, his mother said, her voice thick with emotion. You buy that little girl whatever she wants. You've earned it. Both of you have earned it. Ryan ended the call and sat there for a few more minutes, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. This morning, he'd woken up terrified, convinced he was about to blow his one chance at stability. He'd run into a burning building without thinking about the consequences. He'd ruined his borrowed suit, cut his hand, exhausted himself, and walked into an interview smelling like smoke and desperation. And somehow, impossibly, it had all worked out. The woman he'd saved had turned out to be the CEO of the company. His impulsive rescue had demonstrated exactly the skills they needed. His honesty about his struggles had shown his character rather than his weakness. Everything that should have been a disaster had instead aligned in a way that seemed almost too perfect to be real. But it was real. The folder in his hands was real, with the offer letter and salary breakdown and benefits package. The bandage on his palm was real, a reminder that this morning had actually happened. The exhaustion seeping into his bones was real, earned through hours of stress and fear and hope. Ryan pushed himself to his feet, his knee protesting but holding. He had a daughter waiting at home, a mother who deserved to see her son succeed, and a future that suddenly looked brighter than it had in 2 years. He had a dollhouse to buy, and good news to share, and a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, the hard times were finally coming to an end. As he walked toward the nearest toy store, Ryan allowed himself to imagine tomorrow, walking into Atlas Innovations not as a desperate candidate, but as an employee. Someone with a purpose and a title and a paycheck that would cover more than just survival. Someone his daughter could be proud to call dad. The Chicago wind was still cold, but Ryan barely felt it. He was too warm with hope, too full of possibility to notice the chill. Behind him, in the glass tower of Atlas Innovations, Lauren Carter stood at her office window, watching him walk away, and wondered if maybe fate had been working both ways that morning. She'd gained her life back, yes, but she'd also found exactly the kind of person she'd been searching for. Someone who understood that some things were worth more than profit margins and quarterly reports. Someone who knew that saving lives, whether from fires or from desperation, was always the right choice. She touched her throat, feeling the soreness there, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. Then she returned to her desk, opened her laptop, and started drafting the announcement for her new Director of Safety and Crisis Management. She had a lot of work to do, and now she had the right person to help her do it. The dollhouse was bigger than Ryan had anticipated, taking up most of the back seat of the Uber that carried him home. It was a Victorian-style mansion with 3 stories, a working doorbell, tiny furniture, and even miniature paintings on the walls. The kind of toy he'd walked past in store windows for months, telling himself that someday when things got better, he'd buy it for Maddie. Someday had finally arrived. His mother opened the door before he could knock, her eyes red-rimmed but smiling. "She's been asking about you every 10 minutes, she whispered, pulling him into a fierce hug. "My boy. My beautiful boy. I knew you could do it." "Mama, I need to tell you what happened," Ryan said, his voice low. "It wasn't just the interview, there was—" "Daddy!" Maddie's voice rang out from the living room, and then she was running toward him, her small body launching into his arms with complete faith that he'd catch her. He always did. Ryan lifted her up, ignoring the protest from his knee, and buried his face in her hair. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo his mother used, like childhood and innocence and everything worth fighting for. "Did you get the job, Daddy?" Maddie asked, pulling back to look at his face. Her eyes, the same dark brown as his, were wide with hope. "I got it, baby girl," Ryan said, his voice thick. "I got an even better job than I thought." Maddie squealed and wrapped her arms around his neck, squeezing tight. "Does that mean we can get the good macaroni now? The kind with the shapes?" Ryan laughed, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Yeah, baby, we can get the good macaroni, and I got you something special." He set her down and went to retrieve the dollhouse from where the Uber driver had helped him prop it by the door. "I know your birthday isn't for another month, but I wanted to celebrate today." The look on Maddie's face when she saw the dollhouse was something Ryan would remember for the rest of his life. Her mouth fell open, her eyes went impossibly wide, and for a moment she just stood there, frozen in disbelief. Then she was moving, running to the box, her small hands reaching out to touch it, as if she was afraid it might disappear. Is this really mine?" Her voice was barely a whisper. All yours, sweetheart. Maddie turned to him, and the pure joy on her face was worth every terrible night, every humiliating gig, every moment of crushing desperation he'd endured over the past 2 years. Thank you, Daddy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. His mother wiped her eyes with a tissue. Come on, baby girl. Let's get this set up in your room while your daddy tells me all about his day. As Maddie carefully carried pieces of the dollhouse down the hallway, his mother pulled Ryan into the kitchen. She put the kettle on, her solution to every situation, good or bad, and sat him down at the small table where he'd eaten breakfast every morning of his childhood. Now tell me, she said, her hands folded on the table. Tell me everything. So Ryan did. He told her about waking at 4 a.m., about the borrowed suit and the early morning coffee, about the smoke he'd smelled and the decision he'd made without thinking. He told her about the woman trapped in the hotel room, about carrying her down 7 flights of stairs through fire and smoke, about disappearing before anyone could ask his name. He told her about showing up to the interview reeking of smoke despite his best efforts, about walking into that conference room and seeing her there, the CEO, the woman whose life he'd saved, the person who would decide his future. His mother listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to fear to wonder as the story unfolded. When he got to the part about Lauren creating a position specifically for him, about the salary and benefits and the chance to rebuild his life, she reached across the table and gripped his hands. Do you understand what this means? She asked, her voice trembling. Do you understand what just happened to you? I got lucky, Ryan said. If I hadn't been in that neighborhood this morning, if the fire had been on a different floor, if she'd already evacuated, no, his mother interrupted firmly. This wasn't luck, baby. This was you being exactly who you are. You saw someone in trouble and you helped. You always have. Even when you were a little boy, you'd come home with stray cats and kids who were being bullied, and once, God, I'll never forget this, that homeless man you invited for dinner because you said he looked hungry. Ryan smiled at the memory. He'd been 8, and his mother had been furious at first, until the man had turned out to be a former veteran who'd fallen on hard times. They'd ended up helping him connect with a shelter and job placement services. It was probably one of the moments that had set Ryan on the path to becoming a firefighter. The point is, his mother continued, you don't help people because you expect something in return. You help them because that's who you are. And today, the universe decided to help you back. That's not luck, sweetheart. That's justice. The kettle whistled, and his mother stood to pour tea into 2 mismatched mugs. She set one in front of Ryan, and he wrapped his hands around it, letting the warmth seep into his cold fingers. I'm scared, Mama, he admitted quietly. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not as good as she thinks I am? What if… Ryan Michael Hale, his mother said, using his full name the way she had when he was a child. You listen to me. That woman didn't offer you this job out of obligation. She's a CEO. She didn't get to that position by making poor decisions. She saw something in you, the same thing I've always seen. Courage, integrity, the ability to stay calm in a crisis and do what needs to be done. You're going to walk into that building tomorrow, and you're going to be brilliant. From Maddie's room, they could hear her playing, creating elaborate stories for the tiny dollhouse family. Ryan closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him, the voice of his daughter, happy and carefree, not worried about whether they'd have enough money for her inhaler or whether she'd have to change schools again. I start tomorrow, Ryan said, opening his eyes. I haven't even had time to process everything that happened today, and I start tomorrow. Then you'd better get some rest, his mother said practically. When was the last time you slept a full night? Ryan couldn't remember. Between Maddie's asthma, his overnight rideshare shifts, and the constant anxiety about money, real sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford. But tonight he could sleep. Tonight he could close his eyes without immediately calculating how many days until the next bill was due, how many more gigs he'd need to cover expenses, how much longer he could keep this fragile life from collapsing. Stay for dinner, his mother said. It wasn't a question. I'll make your favorite pot roast with those little potatoes you like. We'll celebrate properly. Ryan wanted to protest, to say she'd already done so much, but the truth was he couldn't face going back to his empty apartment just yet. He needed this. His mother's cooking, Maddie's laughter, the feeling of family and home and safety. I'd like that, he said softly. His mother smiled and squeezed his shoulder as she moved to the refrigerator. Go play with your daughter. I'll call you when it's ready. Ryan found Maddie on the floor of her room, completely absorbed in setting up the dollhouse. She'd arranged all the furniture with meticulous care and was now creating an elaborate backstory for each tiny resident. This is Mama Bear, she explained, holding up a small figure. She's a doctor and she helps people feel better. And this is Papa Bear, and he's a firefighter like you used to be, Daddy. Used to be, Ryan echoed, the words hitting harder than they should have. He'd never quite come to terms with that identity being in the past tense. But now you have a new job, Maddie continued, oblivious to his moment of melancholy. What's your new job, Daddy? I'm going to be the Director of Safety and Crisis Management, Ryan said, settling down on the floor next to her. The title still felt foreign in his mouth, too important for someone like him. Maddie scrunched up her nose, thinking, what does that mean? It means I help keep people safe. I make plans for what to do if something goes wrong, and I make sure everyone knows how to stay safe. Like a superhero? Maddie's eyes lit up. Ryan laughed. Not quite, baby girl. More like someone who helps other people be safe so they don't need a superhero. I think that's even better, Maddie said seriously, because preventing bad things is smarter than just fixing them after. Ryan stared at his 6-year-old daughter, amazed as always by the wisdom that came out of her sometimes. You know what? You're absolutely right. That's exactly what I'll be doing. They played together until his mother called them for dinner, creating stories and arranging furniture and pretending that the tiny dollhouse family lived in a world where nothing bad ever happened and everyone was safe and happy. It was the kind of afternoon Ryan had dreamed about during those long, desperate nights. Quality time with his daughter, no clock to watch, no next gig to rush to, just presence and peace. Dinner was everything his mother's cooking always was, warm and filling and tasting like love. They sat around the small kitchen table, the three of them. And for the first time in longer than Ryan could remember, the future didn't feel like a threat hanging over his head. It felt like a possibility, like something worth looking forward to. After dinner, after helping clean up, after reading Maddie 3 stories and tucking her into bed with promises that yes, he'd be there when she woke up in the morning, Ryan finally headed home. The Uber driver tried to make small talk, but Ryan was too exhausted to engage. He stared out the window at Chicago sliding past. The same city he'd lived in his entire life, but tonight it looked different. Brighter somehow. Full of promise instead of just problems. His apartment was dark when he walked in, small and shabby in a way that used to make him feel ashamed, but tonight just felt temporary. This place wouldn't be home forever. With his new salary, he could start saving for something better. Nothing fancy, but maybe a 2-bedroom in a safer neighborhood with a little patch of grass where Maddie could play. Maybe a place where the heat worked consistently and the neighbors didn't fight at 3 a.m. and the smoke detector wasn't held together with duct tape. Ryan took a long, hot shower, a luxury he usually rationed, and let the water wash away the smoke and ash and fear that had clung to him all day. Under the spray, he finally let himself think about Lauren Carter. Not as his new boss, but as the woman he'd carried out of that burning building. He remembered the weight of her in his arms, the way she'd clung to him, the terror in her eyes. He remembered the moment their gazes had locked in that conference room, the silent acknowledgement passing between them of what they'd shared. She'd been professional, appropriate, careful to draw boundaries between the rescue and the job offer. But there had been moments when she'd talked about her dog, when she'd asked about Maddie, when she'd smiled at him as they shook hands on the deal, moments when Ryan had seen past the CEO to the person underneath, someone who'd come frighteningly close to death and knew it, someone who understood the weight of second chances. He wondered what she was doing now. Probably working late. CEOs always seemed to be working. Or maybe she'd gone home to that golden retriever she'd mentioned, the one she loved despite his chaos. Maybe she was sitting in her undoubtedly much nicer apartment, reflecting on the strange turn her day had taken. Maybe she was thinking about him. Ryan shook his head, dismissing the thought. She was his boss, his very important, very professional boss who'd given him a life-changing opportunity. Whatever connection they might have felt in that moment of crisis, whatever understanding had passed between them, it couldn't become anything more than a solid working relationship. He needed this job too badly to risk complicating it with inappropriate feelings or boundary crossing. He climbed into bed, his alarm set for 6 a.m., earlier than necessary, but he wanted time to get ready properly and expected to lie awake for hours, his mind spinning with everything that had happened. Instead, he fell asleep almost immediately, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion that had been building since 2 a.m. He dreamed of fire and smoke, but this time when he reached the woman trapped in the burning room, she turned to face him, and she wasn't afraid. She was smiling. And when he lifted her into his arms to carry her to safety, she whispered, "I've got you too." Ryan's alarm jolted him awake at 6 a.m. And for a confused moment, he couldn't remember why his body ached like he'd been hit by a truck. Then it all came flooding back. The fire, the rescue, the interview, the job, the new beginning that started today. He dressed carefully in his one remaining good suit, not the borrowed one, which he'd need to get cleaned and returned to Mr. Chen, and a crisp new shirt he'd bought last night at Target, along with the dollhouse. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different somehow. Still tired, still bearing the marks of yesterday's ordeal in the form of dark circles and a bandaged hand. But there was something else too, a spark of hope in his eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. Ryan made himself breakfast, actual breakfast, not just coffee and anxiety, and reviewed the folder Lauren had given him. The official start date was listed as today, reporting time 9 a.m., dress code business casual, parking validation available at the front desk. There was a schedule for his first week, orientation with HR, meetings with each department head, a tour of their other facilities, a one-on-one with Lauren herself scheduled for Friday afternoon. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "First day. You're going to be amazing. Maddie wants to FaceTime you tonight to hear all about it. We love you." Another text, this one from a number he didn't recognize. "Ryan, this is Lauren Carter. I wanted to reach out before your first day to say welcome to Atlas Innovations. I'm looking forward to working with you. See you at 9. Elsie Ryan stared at the message, unreasonably pleased that she'd taken the time to text him personally. He typed out several responses, deleting each one as too casual or too formal or too eager, before settling on, "Thank you, I'm looking forward to it as well." Simple, professional, appropriate. The bus ride to Atlas Innovations felt different than it had yesterday morning. Then, Ryan had been full of dread and desperate hope, convinced he was about to blow his one shot. Now he was an employee, someone who belonged in that glass tower, someone with a purpose and a title and a future. Other passengers jostled past him, lost in their own worlds, and Ryan wondered if any of them could tell that his entire life had changed in the span of 24 hours. He arrived at Atlas Innovations at 8:45 a.m., deliberately early. The lobby was busier than it had been yesterday, full of employees arriving for work with coffee cups and briefcases and the easy confidence of people who knew where they belonged. Ryan approached the reception desk, where a different person, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, greeted him. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "Ryan Hale. It's my first day. I'm supposed to meet with HR at 9. The woman's face lit up. "Mr. Hale! Yes, we've been expecting you. Welcome to Atlas Innovations. I'm Margaret, and I'll be the one you see every morning. Let me get you set up with a temporary badge, and then I'll let Jennifer know you're here." She handed him a clip-on badge with his photo, apparently taken from his resume, and the word temporary printed across it in red. "Your permanent badge should be ready by the end of the week. Jennifer will be right down." Ryan clipped the badge to his jacket and stood in the lobby, trying not to feel like an imposter. Around him, employees swiped their badges and moved through security turnstiles with practiced ease. They nodded to each other, called out greetings, moved through the space like they owned it. Someday soon, that would be him. Someday soon, he'd walk through this lobby with the same confidence, the same sense of belonging. "Ryan!" Jennifer appeared from the elevator, clipboard in hand and that same bright smile from yesterday. "Welcome to your first day. Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Ryan said, managing a smile. "Great. Let's get you set up." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of paperwork. Tax forms, direct deposit information, benefit selection, emergency contacts, non-disclosure agreements. Jennifer walked him through each document with patient efficiency, explaining options and answering questions. The health insurance alone was overwhelming in its comprehensiveness. Dental coverage, vision coverage, mental health services, prescription drug benefits with a maximum out-of-pocket that Ryan could actually afford. He kept having to blink back tears as he filled out Maddie's information as his dependent, realizing that her asthma medication would now cost $30 instead of $300. "Now for the fun part," Jennifer said once the paperwork was complete. "Let me show you your office." Office. Ryan had an office. Not a cubicle or a shared workspace, but an actual office with a door and windows. Jennifer led him to the 5th floor down a corridor lined with other offices and stopped at one near the end. The nameplate beside the door read, "Ryan Hale, Director of Safety and Crisis Management." "This is you," Jennifer said, opening the door with a flourish. The office was modest but professional. A desk with a computer, an ergonomic chair, a small conference table with 4 chairs, a bookshelf currently empty but full of potential, and a window that looked out over the city. Ryan's city, the place he'd spent his entire life, viewed now from a perspective he'd never imagined reaching. "I know it's not huge," Jennifer said, misreading his silence, "but Lauren wanted you on the executive floor close to her office. She said it's important for your position to have direct access to leadership." "It's perfect," Ryan said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "It's more than perfect." Jennifer smiled warmly. "I'll give you a few minutes to settle in. Your computer login information is on the desk, along with your employee handbook and some other materials. Lauren wants to see you at 10 to discuss your initial priorities. Can you find your way to her office, or should I come get you?" "I can find it," Ryan said. "Thank you, Jennifer, for everything." After she left, Ryan stood in the center of his office, and tried to absorb the reality of it. 24 hours ago, he'd been sitting in a diner, nursing cold coffee and wondering how he'd make it through one more month. Now he was here, in a space that was his, doing work that mattered, earning enough money to give his daughter the life she deserved. He sat at the desk and logged into the computer, watching as the system populated with his information: email access, calendar, company directory. Everything he needed to function as a real employee. His email already had several messages: welcome notes from various department heads, an invitation to the weekly all-staff meeting, a calendar invitation for a safety audit meeting next Tuesday. At 9:58 a.m., Ryan headed to Lauren's office. Her assistant, a young man named David, who seemed impossibly organized, waved him through immediately. "She's expecting you. Go right in." Ryan knocked once, heard Lauren's voice call out, and pushed open the door. She was standing by the window, phone to her ear, but she gestured for him to enter and take a seat. He sat in one of the chairs across from her desk and tried not to stare. Lauren looked different today than she had yesterday. Less shaken, more composed, fully inhabiting the role of CEO. She wore a navy suit with a cream blouse, her hair pulled back in the same professional style. But when she finished her call and turned to face him, Ryan could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the slight rasp still in her voice from smoke inhalation, reminders that yesterday had been real. "Ryan," she said, coming to sit behind her desk, "how's your first morning going?" "Overwhelming," he admitted, "but good, really good." "I'm glad." She pulled up something on her computer. "I wanted to meet with you before you started diving into department meetings and facility tours. I think it's important that we establish some clear expectations and boundaries from the start." Ryan's stomach tightened. Here it came. The reminder that yesterday had been an anomaly, that their relationship going forward needed to be strictly professional, that he shouldn't expect special treatment. "First," Lauren continued, her tone businesslike, "I want to make it clear that while the circumstances of our meeting were extraordinary, I hired you because you're qualified for this position. I need you to understand that. This isn't charity or obligation. It's a strategic decision for this company." "I understand," Ryan said. "Second, I expect the same level of professionalism from you that I expect from all my executives. You'll be managing sensitive information, making decisions that affect employee safety, and representing Atlas Innovations in various capacities. That's a significant responsibility." "I'm ready for it." "Third," Lauren said, and her expression softened slightly, "I need you to know that you can come to me if you're struggling. Learning a new position is always challenging, especially when you're transitioning from a completely different field. I don't expect you to know everything immediately. What I expect is honesty. If you need help, ask for it. If you make a mistake, own it. If you're drowning, say so before you go under. Ryan nodded, throat tight. Thank you. That means a lot. Lauren leaned back in her chair, studying him. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Yesterday, when you ran into that hotel, were you afraid? Ryan considered the question carefully. No, he said finally. I was focused. Fear is something that happens when you have time to think about consequences. In that moment, I was just doing what needed to be done. The fear came later, when I realized what could have happened if things had gone differently. And yet you'd do it again, Lauren said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Why? Ryan met her gaze steadily. Because the alternative, walking away, doing nothing, letting someone die when I could have saved them, that's not something I could live with. The fear, the risk, even the consequences if it had gone wrong, those are all temporary. But knowing I didn't even try, that would haunt me forever. Lauren was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. That's exactly why I hired you. That mindset, that inability to walk away from someone in trouble, that's what this company needs. Not just in theory, but embedded in our culture, in our decision-making, in everything we do. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. These are my initial priorities for your position. I want you to review our current emergency protocols at all our facilities. We have offices in Chicago, Austin, and Seattle, plus 3 manufacturing plants. I want comprehensive risk assessments, updated evacuation procedures, and training programs for all employees. I also want you to establish relationships with local emergency services in each location. You have a budget of $200,000 for the first year to implement whatever changes you deem necessary. Ryan opened the folder, scanning the detailed list of priorities. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Real work, important work, work that would make a difference. One more thing, Lauren said. I'm assigning you an assistant. Her name is Kara Simmons, and she's been with the company for 3 years. She's smart, organized, and knows everyone. She'll help you navigate the company politics and get things done. I don't know what to say, Ryan managed. Say you'll make me proud, Lauren said. Say you'll build something here that matters. Say you'll take the courage you showed yesterday and channel it into making this company safer for every single person who works here. I will, Ryan promised. I swear I will. Lauren smiled, that same genuine smile from yesterday, and extended her hand. Then welcome aboard, Director Hale. Let's get to work. Ryan shook Lauren's hand, and as he left her office, the weight of what he'd just committed to settled over him like a mantle. $200,000. Multiple facilities across 3 states. The safety of hundreds of employees resting on decisions he'd make. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Kara Simmons was waiting outside his office when he returned, a tablet tucked under one arm and an expression that suggested she'd already sized him up and was reserving judgment. She was maybe 25 with dark curly hair pulled into a high ponytail and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. Director Hale, she said, not quite warmly but not coldly either. I'm Kara. Lauren asked me to help you get oriented. Please call me Ryan, he said, unlocking his office door. And I appreciate the help. I'm going to need a lot of it. Something in Kara's expression shifted at his admission, a slight softening around the eyes. Most new executives pretend they know everything. It's refreshing to meet someone who admits otherwise. They spent the next hour going over the basics. Kara walked him through the company structure, explaining the relationships between departments with the kind of insight that only came from years of observation. She showed him how to navigate the internal systems, where to find archived documents, and who to talk to when he needed something done quickly. The Austin office is managed by Derek Chen, Kara said, scrolling through profiles on her tablet. He's territorial and doesn't like being told what to do by Chicago. You'll need to approach him diplomatically. Seattle is run by Patricia Morrison. She's great, very collaborative. But she's also drowning in work, so don't expect immediate responses. The manufacturing plants report to Tom Sullivan, who's old school and skeptical of anything that sounds like corporate oversight. So basically, I need to win over people who either don't want my input or don't have time for it, Ryan said wryly. Welcome to middle management, Kara replied with the ghost of a smile. The trick is making them think the safety improvements were their idea. Let me show you how that works. By lunchtime, Ryan's head was spinning with names and protocols and political landmines he'd need to navigate. Kara had arranged meetings for him throughout the week, introductory calls with each facility manager, a walkthrough of the Chicago office's current emergency systems, a review session with the legal team about liability and compliance. You should eat something, Kara said, noting the time. There's a cafeteria on the second floor, or I can order in if you prefer. Cafeteria's fine, Ryan said, standing and immediately regretting it as his knee protested. He'd been on his feet more in the past 2 days than he had in months, and his old injury was making its displeasure known. Kara noticed his grimace. You okay? Old injury, Ryan explained. Nothing serious, just complains when I push it too hard. There's a physical therapy place 2 blocks from here that a lot of employees use, Kara said. I can get you their information if you want. Company insurance covers it. Ryan paused, absorbing that. Company insurance that would cover physical therapy. The kind of ongoing treatment he'd been unable to afford since his discharge. The kind that might actually help instead of just managing the pain with over-the-counter medication and ice packs. Yeah, he said quietly. I'd like that. Thank you. The cafeteria was buzzing with the lunch crowd. Employees clustered around tables, animated conversations filling the space. Ryan felt conspicuous in his suit, aware that people were glancing his way with curiosity. The new guy. The one who'd somehow landed a director position seemingly out of nowhere. He was loading a tray with a sandwich and soup when a voice behind him said, So you're the hero. Ryan turned to find Marcus Webb, the VP of Operations from his interview, standing with his own tray. The man's expression was neutral, but Ryan detected a hint of challenge in his tone. I'm just Ryan, he said carefully. Come on, Marcus said, gesturing to a table in the corner. Let's talk. They sat, and for a moment neither spoke. Ryan bit into his sandwich, waiting for Marcus to make his point. He'd dealt with enough territorial senior firefighters to recognize the dynamic. The established authority figure testing the new person, seeing if they'd fold under pressure or stand their ground. I'm going to be honest with you, Marcus said finally. I wasn't thrilled about Lauren creating this position. We have protocols, we have systems. We've never had a major incident in 10 years of operation. And that's exactly when you're most vulnerable, Ryan said quietly. When you think you're safe, when you've gotten comfortable. That's when something happens that your protocols didn't account for. Marcus studied him over his coffee cup. You sound pretty confident for someone whose first day was 3 hours ago. I spent 5 years responding to emergencies, Ryan replied. Do you know how many fires I saw that started because someone thought they were safe? Because they'd always done it that way and nothing had ever gone wrong. Complacency kills, Mr. Webb. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, by inches, until the day it doesn't. Marcus, the older man said after a moment. If we're going to work together, call me Marcus. He leaned back in his chair. Okay, I'll bite. What's the first thing you'd change about our current setup? Ryan had been reviewing protocols all morning, and one thing had jumped out immediately. Your evacuation routes. In the Chicago office, you have 2 primary stairwells and 1 emergency exit that leads to the parking garage. If there's a fire in that garage, which is statistically likely given the concentration of vehicles, you've just cut off 1/3 of your exit capacity. And the 2 stairwells both feed into the main lobby, which means if there's a crowd, you've created a bottleneck that could turn deadly. Marcus frowned. We've had those routes since the building was constructed. I'm sure they met code at the time, but code is minimum standard, not best practice. I'd want to add emergency exits on multiple floors, create alternative routes, and install better signage that stays visible in low visibility conditions. I'd also want to run regular drills, not the kind where you announce them a week in advance, but surprise evacuations so people learn to respond under actual stress conditions. That's going to be expensive, Marcus said, and disruptive. Not as expensive as a lawsuit if someone dies in a fire we could have prevented, Ryan countered. And yes, it'll be disruptive. Safety usually is. But the alternative is gambling with people's lives, and I don't take those bets. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying Ryan with renewed interest. Lauren said you ran into a burning building yesterday morning, that you carried her out through conditions that should have killed you both. I did my job, Ryan said simply. Your old job, Marcus corrected. You're not a firefighter anymore. You're a corporate executive. That means thinking about budgets and timelines and getting buy-in from stakeholders. It means compromise and negotiation and sometimes accepting that good enough is all you're going to get. Ryan set down his sandwich and met Marcus's gaze directly. With all due respect, sir, when it comes to safety, there's no such thing as good enough. There's only safe or not safe. And if this company isn't willing to invest in keeping its people safe, then I'm in the wrong place. The challenge hung in the air between them. Ryan knew he was taking a risk, potentially alienating a key ally on his first day. But he also knew that if he backed down now, if he showed that his principles could be negotiated away, he'd never be taken seriously. Marcus's expression remained neutral for another beat, and then, unexpectedly, he smiled. You know what? I think I'm going to like working with you. Most people come into this job trying to tell everyone what they want to hear. You just told me I'm wrong to my face. I didn't mean, Ryan started, but Marcus waved him off. No. That's exactly what Lauren hired you for. Someone who won't cave when people push back. God knows we need that around here. He stood, picking up his tray. I'm meeting with the Austin team this afternoon about their Q2 projections. Sit in if you want. You should meet Derek sooner rather than later, and it might help to see how he operates. I'd appreciate that, Ryan said, surprised by the olive branch. Conference room 8B, 2 o'clock. Don't be late. Derek hates that. Marcus paused, then added, and Ryan? The thing about being an executive, it's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and building the right team. You've got good instincts. Trust them. After Marcus left, Ryan sat alone with his lunch, processing the conversation. He'd expected resistance, and he'd gotten it, but he'd also gotten something unexpected, respect, or at least the beginning of it. Maybe he could do this after all. Maybe he could navigate the politics and the budgets and the compromises without losing sight of what mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. How's it going, baby? Maddie wants to know if you have a big desk. Ryan smiled and took a photo of his office from the doorway, making sure to capture the nameplate and window. He sent it with the caption, "Tell her I have a very big desk and my own window." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, she's dancing around the living room, so proud of her daddy. We both are. The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings. The call with Derek Chen from Austin was exactly as Kara had predicted. Derek was defensive and dismissive, treating Ryan's questions about their safety protocols as an accusation rather than genuine inquiry. Ryan made notes and kept his tone neutral, watching how Marcus navigated the conversation with a combination of flattery and strategic questions that got information without triggering Derek's territorial instincts. After the call, Marcus caught Ryan's eye. See what I mean? You can't go in strong with guys like Derek. You have to make them feel like they're teaching you, not the other way around. Even if they're wrong? Ryan asked. Especially if they're wrong. Because if you tell them that directly, they'll dig in their heels and fight every change you try to make. But if you ask questions that make them realize their own gaps, that's when real change happens. It was a masterclass in corporate politics, and Ryan absorbed it all, mentally cataloging strategies for the conversations he'd need to have in the coming weeks. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, he was exhausted in a way that was different from the physical exhaustion of firefighting, a mental fatigue that came from constant vigilance and strategic thinking. Kara appeared in his doorway as he was shutting down his computer. Surviving your first day? Barely, Ryan admitted. Is it always this intense? This was actually pretty light, Kara said with a sympathetic smile. Wait until you're managing multiple facility audits while dealing with a crisis in real time. That's when it gets fun. Your definition of fun is concerning, Ryan said, grabbing his jacket. One more thing before you go, Kara said, handing him a folder. These are the incident reports from the past 2 years. Slip and falls, near misses, equipment malfunctions, everything we're required to document. Lauren wants you to review them and see if there are any patterns we've missed. Ryan took the folder, feeling its weight. Light reading for tonight? Welcome to executive life, Kara said. The work never really stops. It just moves from the office to wherever you are. The bus ride home was crowded with rush hour commuters, but Ryan barely noticed. He was already opening the folder, scanning through incident reports, his trained eye picking out patterns and red flags. 3 slip-and-fall incidents in the same Austin office corridor within 6 months that suggested a drainage or flooring issue. Multiple reports of equipment malfunctions in the Seattle facility's warehouse section, potential maintenance gaps. A near miss in Chicago, where a shelving unit had nearly collapsed, structural concerns that needed immediate attention. By the time he reached his apartment, Ryan had filled 3 pages with notes and questions. He made himself dinner, instant ramen because some habits died hard, and continued reading, cross-referencing reports with facility layouts that Kara had included in the folder. At 7 o'clock, his phone rang. FaceTime from his mother. "Daddy!" Maddie's face filled the screen, beaming. "Grandma says you have an office with a window." "I do, baby girl," Ryan said, his exhaustion melting away at the sight of her joy. "And my own desk, and a computer, and even my own assistant." "What's an assistant?" "Someone who helps me do my job. Her name is Kara, and she's very smart." "Are you helping people stay safe?" Maddie asked, her expression suddenly serious. "Like you used to?" "That's exactly what I'm doing," Ryan confirmed. "I'm making plans to keep people safe so they can work without worrying about getting hurt." "That's important work, Daddy," Maddie said solemnly. "You're doing a good job." The simple affirmation from his 6-year-old daughter hit Ryan harder than any professional praise could. This was why he was doing all of this. Not for the title or the salary, but to be the father Maddie deserved. To give her a life where she didn't have to worry about whether they'd have enough money for her medicine, where she could just be a kid and dream about being a veterinarian without the weight of adult anxieties pressing down on her. "Thank you, sweetheart," Ryan said, his voice thick. "That means the world to me." His mother's face appeared on the screen. "Let your daddy get some rest, baby. He's had a long day." To Ryan, she said, "You look exhausted. Are you eating enough? Getting sleep?" "I'm fine, Mama," Ryan assured her. "Just adjusting to the new schedule. I'll come by this weekend, okay? We can take Maddie to the park." After they hung up, Ryan returned to the incident reports, but his focus was fractured. The words blurred together, his mind drifting back to the fire, to Lauren's face when she'd realized who he was, to Marcus's unexpected respect, to the sheer unreality of how dramatically his life had changed in 48 hours. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the number that was now saved in his contacts as Lauren Carter, work. "How was your first day? I hope the team wasn't too overwhelming." Elsie Ryan stared at the message, debating how to respond. Professional but friendly, casual but appropriate? He settled on, "Intense but good. Marcus let me sit in on the Austin call. I'm reviewing incident reports now." The response came quickly. "You don't need to work tonight. First day is overwhelming enough without homework. Can't help it. I see patterns in these reports that need addressing." A longer pause this time, then, "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. But seriously, Ryan, pace yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Get some rest." "Yes, ma'am, and stop calling me ma'am. It makes me feel ancient." Ryan smiled at his phone, then forced himself to close the folder and actually take her advice. He was exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that went beyond physical. His knee was throbbing despite the ibuprofen he'd taken. His shoulder ached from yesterday's exertions. His hand, still bandaged, had started to sting again. But underneath all of that, there was something else. A sense of purpose he hadn't felt since his discharge from the fire department. A feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Ryan fell asleep that night with incident reports scattered across his bed, and his phone still in his hand. And he dreamed not of fire, but of buildings full of people, all safe, all protected by systems he'd designed and protocols he'd implemented. In his dream, Lauren stood beside him, watching the same scene, and when she turned to him, she said, "You did this. You saved them all." The rest of the week unfolded in a similar pattern, long days filled with meetings and facility tours and endless cups of coffee, followed by evenings of reading reports and developing preliminary recommendations. Ryan met with Patricia Morrison in Seattle, via video call and found her to be exactly as Kara had described, collaborative and overworked, but genuinely interested in improving their safety systems. The manufacturing plant managers were harder sells, particularly Tom Sullivan, who made no secret of his skepticism about corporate safety theater. "I've been running these plants for 15 years, Tom had said on their call Thursday afternoon. Never had a serious injury. You know why? Because my people know their jobs, and I don't waste their time with pointless drills and procedures." "With all respect, Mr. Sullivan," Ryan had replied, keeping his tone even, "the absence of serious injury isn't the same as the presence of safety. It just means you've been lucky so far, and luck runs out." "Is that a threat?" "It's a statistical reality. I'd like to come out and tour your facilities next week, if that works for your schedule. Not to tell you how to do your job, but to understand your operations well enough to develop protocols that actually help rather than hinder." Tom had grudgingly agreed to a visit, though Ryan suspected it would be more hostile tour than collaborative fact-finding mission. Still, it was a start. By Friday afternoon, when Ryan walked into Lauren's office for their scheduled one-on-one, he felt like he'd aged a year in 5 days. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from meaningful work rather than empty labor. "Sit," Lauren said, gesturing to the informal seating area by her window, rather than the formal chairs across from her desk. It felt more personal, less like a boss-employee review, and more like a conversation between colleagues. Ryan settled into the comfortable chair, accepting the bottle of water Lauren offered him. Through the window, Chicago stretched out below them, the late afternoon sun painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber. "So," Lauren said, curling up in her own chair with a casualness that seemed at odds with her CEO title. "First week impressions?" "Overwhelming, challenging, and exactly what I needed," Ryan said honestly. "I haven't felt this engaged in work since—" He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Since you were a firefighter," Lauren supplied gently. "Yeah, I didn't realize how much I'd been just going through the motions until I had something to actually care about again." "That's what I was hoping," Lauren said. "The best work happens when people are invested in the outcome, when they see meaning in what they're doing beyond just a paycheck." She paused, taking a sip of her own water. "I wanted to check in on how you're feeling about everything, not just the job, but the adjustment, the transition from where you were to where you are now." Ryan considered the question carefully. "Honestly, part of me keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to realize there's been a mistake, that I don't actually belong here. Imposter syndrome, I guess." "That's completely normal," Lauren said. "I felt that way for the first 2 years after I founded this company. Every board meeting, I'd think they're going to figure out I'm making this up as I go." She smiled. "Eventually, I realized everyone is making it up as they go. The difference between success and failure is whether you're willing to adapt when your plans don't work out." "Is that what happened with me?" Ryan asked. "Your plan not working out?" Lauren's expression grew thoughtful. "I'd been trying to convince my board for 6 months that we needed someone focused specifically on safety and crisis management. They kept pushing back, saying it was an unnecessary expense, that our current systems were adequate. And then Monday morning happened. I nearly died because the hotel's safety systems failed. Jammed door, delayed alarm, insufficient emergency lighting. And the person who saved me was exactly the kind of expert I'd been arguing we needed." "So I'm proof of concept," Ryan said, not sure how he felt about that. "You're proof that sometimes the universe has better timing than we do," Lauren corrected. "I could have hired any safety consultant and built a case based on statistics and projections. Instead, I hired the man who demonstrated in the most visceral way possible why this work matters. The board approved your position in under an hour." Ryan absorbed that, understanding the pressure it placed on him. He wasn't just doing a job, he was validating Lauren's judgment, proving that her instinct had been right. If he failed, it wasn't just his career on the line. It was her credibility with her board. "No pressure or anything," he said with dark humor. Lauren laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. "I probably shouldn't have told you all that, but I believe in being honest with the people I work with. You deserve to know what you're walking into." "I appreciate that," Ryan said, "and I promise I'm not going to let you down." "I know you won't." Lauren shifted in her chair, and her expression grew more serious. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." That morning in the hotel, when you carried me out, she stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I was conscious enough to know what was happening, conscious enough to know that you were risking your life for mine, and I couldn't understand why. You didn't know me. You had every reason to prioritize your own safety, but you didn't hesitate. I told you, Ryan said quietly. That's the job. But it wasn't your job anymore, Lauren pressed. You'd been medically discharged. You had no obligation, no responsibility. You could have called 911 and waited for the professionals. Ryan was quiet for a moment, trying to find the words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. When I was in the fire department, I saw people at their worst moments, trapped, terrified, certain they were going to die. And I saw what it meant to them when someone showed up anyway. When someone said, "I've got you," and meant it, that changes you. It becomes part of who you are. So when I smelled that smoke, when I saw people evacuating, I didn't think about whether it was my job anymore. I just thought about whoever might still be inside waiting for someone to show up. Lauren's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You gave me my life back. Do you understand that? I was supposed to die in that room. The door was jammed, I couldn't breathe, I could feel myself fading. And then you appeared like something out of a fever dream, and suddenly I had a future again. I'm glad I was there, Ryan said simply. I'm glad I could help. It's more than help, Lauren said fiercely. She stopped, seeming to realize she was getting too emotional, too vulnerable. She took a breath, visibly recomposing herself. I'm sorry. That was more than I meant to share. It's okay, Ryan said. I think we both went through something intense together. It's okay to acknowledge that. Lauren nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Okay, let me pull myself together and act like a professional CEO again. She managed a watery smile. How about we talk about your facility tour schedule? That's nice and boring and won't make me cry in front of an employee. They spent the next 30 minutes going over logistics. When Ryan would visit each location, what he should focus on during his assessments, how to handle resistance from facility managers. It was exactly the kind of practical, business-focused conversation that should have dominated their relationship. But underneath it, Ryan could feel the current of something deeper, a connection forged in crisis, a mutual understanding that transcended typical professional boundaries. As Ryan stood to leave, Lauren walked him to the door. Have a good weekend, Ryan. Spend time with your daughter. Don't think about work. I'll try, Ryan said, though they both knew he'd probably spend at least some of the weekend reviewing his notes and refining his recommendations. Ryan, Lauren said as he stepped into the hallway. He turned back. Thank you. Not just for Monday morning, but for this. For taking a chance on a position that didn't exist a week ago. For trusting that I knew what I was doing when I offered it to you. Thank you for seeing something in me worth investing in, Ryan replied. I won't forget that. As he walked back to his office to gather his things, Ryan felt the weight of the week settling over him. 5 days ago, he'd been nobody, a has-been firefighter struggling to make rent. Now he was director of safety and crisis management for a multi-million-dollar company, responsible for protecting hundreds of lives, earning more money than he'd ever thought possible, and working for a woman who'd trusted him with something precious. His phone buzzed with a text from Maddie. Daddy, are you coming home soon? I miss you. Ryan smiled and replied, On my way, baby girl. Let's go get ice cream. Because that was the point of all of this, not the title or the office, or even the satisfaction of meaningful work, but the ability to take his daughter for ice cream on a Friday evening without checking his bank balance first. The freedom to say yes instead of always having to say wait. Maybe next time, we'll see. Ryan took one last look at his office, with his name on the door, and his future spread out before him like a map to somewhere better, and headed home to the little girl who made it all worthwhile. The ice cream shop was crowded with families celebrating the end of the work week, children's laughter echoing off the bright painted walls. Maddie pressed her face against the glass display case, deliberating between chocolate chip cookie dough and strawberry swirl with the gravity of someone making a life-altering decision. Ryan watched her with a fullness in his chest that felt like it might crack him open. This simple moment, this ordinary Friday evening ritual that used to be a luxury they couldn't afford, was now just part of their life. Can I get both? Maddie asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. You can get whatever you want, baby girl, Ryan said, and meant it. They sat by the window, Maddie with her double scoop, and Ryan with a simple vanilla cone, and she told him about her week. Art class where she'd painted a rainbow, recess where she'd learned to pump her legs on the swing by herself. The new girl in her class who didn't have any friends yet, so Maddie had invited her to play. That was kind of you, Ryan said, wiping ice cream from her chin. I bet it meant a lot to her. She was sad, Maddie said matter-of-factly. Nobody should be sad at recess. That's when you're supposed to have fun. Ryan smiled at his daughter's simple wisdom, thinking about how much she'd inherited his instinct to help people who were hurting. You're a good person, Maddie. I'm proud of you. Grandma says I'm like you? Maddie said, attacking her ice cream with renewed enthusiasm. She says you always helped people, even when it was hard. Your grandma talks too much, Ryan said, but his voice was warm. She says that's why you got your new job, because you helped someone who needed help, and they wanted to say thank you. Ryan paused, considering how to explain the complexity of what had happened in terms a 6-year-old could understand. It's a little more complicated than that, but yeah, I helped someone, and it turned out that person could help me too. Sometimes things work out that way. Like a circle, Maddie said. We learned about circles in math. They go round and connect back to where they started. Exactly like a circle, Ryan agreed, amazed as always by how his daughter could distill complex ideas into their essential truth. The weekend passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal after the intensity of the previous week. Ryan took Maddie to the park on Saturday, pushing her on the swings and catching her at the bottom of the slide, his knee protesting but manageable. They had dinner at his mother's house, pot roast again, because his mother believed in celebrating good news with familiar comfort food. Sunday was lazy and slow. Cartoons in the dollhouse and building a blanket fort in the living room where they ate popcorn and pretended they were camping in the wilderness. But underneath the domestic peace, Ryan's mind was working. He'd review his notes while Maddie colored beside him, refining his recommendations for each facility. He'd wake early on Sunday morning to respond to emails from Kara about scheduling his facility visits. He'd draft and redraft his initial safety assessment report, trying to strike the right balance between identifying problems and offering solutions without sounding alarmist or condescending. Monday morning arrived too quickly, pulling Ryan back into the office with a packed schedule, back-to-back meetings with department heads, a presentation to the executive team about his preliminary findings, and the looming reality of his first facility tour scheduled for Wednesday in Austin. Derek Chen's territory, which meant Ryan needed to be prepared for resistance and skepticism. He was reviewing his presentation in his office Tuesday afternoon when Kara appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. You need to see this, she said, pulling up something on her tablet. There was an incident at the Seattle facility this morning. Ryan's stomach dropped. What kind of incident? Minor chemical spill in the research lab. No injuries, but it could have been bad. They had to evacuate the entire floor. Kara handed him the tablet, showing the incident report that Patricia Morrison had filed less than an hour ago. Ryan scanned the details, his trained eye immediately catching the red flags. Improper storage of reactive chemicals, inadequate ventilation in the lab space, emergency protocols that hadn't been updated in 3 years. The spill itself was small, contained quickly by staff who'd acted fast, but it exposed systemic vulnerabilities that could lead to something much worse. I need to talk to Patricia, Ryan said, already reaching for his phone. And Lauren, she should know about this immediately. Within 30 minutes, Ryan was in Lauren's office with Marcus and the head of legal discussing the implications of the Seattle incident. Patricia joined via video call, looking exhausted and worried. I take full responsibility, Patricia said, her image on the large monitor dominating one wall of Lauren's office. I should have prioritized the lab safety audit, but we've been so focused on production deadlines. This isn't about blame, Ryan interrupted gently. It's about understanding what happened and making sure it doesn't happen again. Can you walk me through the sequence of events? Patricia detailed the incident. A research assistant had accidentally knocked over a container of solvent while reaching for supplies on a poorly organized shelf. The container had leaked, The fumes had triggered the building's air quality sensors, and the automated emergency system had initiated evacuation protocols. Everything had worked as designed, but barely. If the spill had been larger, if the ventilation had been worse, if someone had been standing closer when the container fell— "We got lucky," Ryan said when Patricia finished. "But we can't count on luck. I'm moving up my Seattle visit. I'll be there Thursday instead of next month." "Ryan, you're supposed to be in Austin Wednesday," Kara reminded him. "I'll do both. Austin Wednesday, Seattle Thursday, back here Friday for the executive briefing." Ryan looked at Lauren, waiting for her to tell him he was being too aggressive, pushing too hard too fast. Instead, Lauren nodded. "Do it. Marcus, clear Ryan's schedule Friday morning so he can recover from the travel. Patricia, I want a complete inventory of your lab facilities before Ryan arrives. Every chemical, every piece of equipment, every protocol. If there are other vulnerabilities like this, we need to know now." "Yes, ma'am," Patricia said, relief evident in her voice. "Thank you for understanding." "Patricia, you're one of our best facility managers," Lauren said. "But this is exactly why we created Ryan's position. We need fresh eyes on systems we've taken for granted. Work with him, not against him. Let him help." After the call ended and Marcus left to handle the legal notifications required by the incident, Lauren turned to Ryan. "That was good instinct, moving up the Seattle visit. But are you sure you can handle back-to-back facility tours? That's a lot of travel in a short time." "I'll manage," Ryan said. "This is what you hired me for, right? Identifying risks and addressing them before they become disasters." "I hired you for a lot of reasons," Lauren said quietly. "But yes, this is exactly the kind of situation where your experience is invaluable. Just pace yourself, okay? You've been here less than 2 weeks. You don't have to solve every problem immediately." "With respect, I kind of do," Ryan said. "If something happens at one of our facilities before I've had a chance to assess it, before I've implemented even basic improvements, that's on me. That's my responsibility now." Lauren studied him for a long moment, and Ryan couldn't quite read her expression. "You really can't help yourself, can you? You see a problem and you have to fix it. You see someone in danger and you have to save them." "Is that a bad thing?" "No," Lauren said softly. "It's exactly who I hoped you were. Just remember that you can't save everyone all at once. Sometimes you have to prioritize, to make strategic choices about where to focus your energy." "Noted," Ryan said. "But right now, Seattle is the priority. We got lucky this time. I don't want to test that luck again." The Austin facility tour on Wednesday was everything Ryan expected. Derek Chen was territorial and defensive, treating every question as a criticism and every suggestion as an attack on his competence. Ryan spent 8 hours walking through warehouses and offices, noting inadequate fire suppression systems, poorly marked emergency exits, and training protocols that existed only on paper. Derek shadowed him the entire time, offering justifications for every shortcoming and minimizing every concern. "We've never had a serious incident," Derek said for the 10th time as they stood in a warehouse with exit signs that were barely visible through the ambient lighting. "Our people know what they're doing." "I'm sure they do," Ryan said patiently. "But knowledge doesn't matter if they can't see the exits in an emergency. These signs need to be illuminated, probably with battery backup in case of power failure." "That's expensive," Derek countered. "So are wrongful death lawsuits," Ryan replied, keeping his tone professional but firm. "Look, Derek, I'm not here to make your life difficult. I'm here to help. But I can't do that if you fight me on every recommendation. These aren't suggestions. These are basic safety standards that should already be in place." Derek's jaw tightened. "Are you going to put that in your report? That Austin isn't meeting standards?" "I'm going to put in my report exactly what I observed, along with recommended solutions and estimated costs. What happens after that is Lauren's decision, not mine." Ryan paused, then added more gently, "I know change is hard. I know it feels like I'm swooping in and criticizing everything you've built. But I promise, my goal isn't to make you look bad. It's to keep your people safe. Can we work together on that?" Something in Derek's expression shifted. Not quite acceptance, but at least a grudging willingness to listen. "Fine. Show me what you think needs to change, and I'll see what I can do about budget." By the time Ryan caught his flight to Seattle that evening, he was exhausted and his report for Austin was only half finished. He worked on his laptop during the flight, documenting findings and drafting recommendations, only stopping when the flight attendant gently reminded him to put away his computer for landing. Patricia Morrison met him at the Seattle facility Thursday morning with coffee and genuine gratitude. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, leading him through the building. "I've been beating myself up about that spill. I should have seen it coming." "Hindsight is perfect vision," Ryan said. "What matters is what we do now. Show me the lab where it happened." The research facility was impressive. State-of-the-art equipment, talented staff, cutting-edge work in materials science. But underneath the innovation, Ryan saw the same problems he'd seen in Austin. Protocols that had grown stale, equipment that hadn't been properly maintained, training that happened once during onboarding and never again. "Your people are smart and capable," Ryan told Patricia as they toured the labs. "But intelligence doesn't prevent accidents. Systems prevent accidents. Redundancy prevents accidents. Creating a culture where people feel comfortable reporting near misses and safety concerns that prevents accidents." "So what do we need to change?" Patricia asked, and unlike Derek, she sounded genuinely eager to hear the answer. Ryan spent the rest of the day conducting a thorough assessment, interviewing staff, reviewing procedures, and documenting everything that needed attention. Patricia accompanied him throughout, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. By the time he left to catch his evening flight back to Chicago, Ryan had a comprehensive list of recommendations, and Patricia had a preliminary action plan. "You're good at this," Patricia said as she walked him to his Uber. "Making people feel heard instead of judged. That's rare in corporate consultants." "I'm not a consultant," Ryan said. "I'm just someone who's seen what happens when safety becomes an afterthought. I don't want that happening here." The flight back to Chicago was delayed, and Ryan didn't get home until after midnight. He was so tired he could barely think straight, but his mind kept churning through everything he'd seen over the past 2 days. The problems were manageable. None of the facilities were disasters waiting to happen, but they all needed work, significant work. The kind of comprehensive overhaul that would take months and substantial budget allocation. Friday morning arrived too soon, dragging Ryan out of bed after 4 hours of sleep. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, hair that refused to cooperate, his knee swollen from 2 days of constant walking. But he had a presentation to give, recommendations to defend, and a job to prove he could actually do. Kara took one look at him when he arrived at the office and immediately brought him coffee and ibuprofen. "You look like death," she said with her characteristic bluntness. "Maybe reschedule the executive briefing?" "Can't," Ryan said, downing the pills. "Lauren's board wants an update on the Seattle incident, and they want it today." The conference room was full when Ryan arrived. Lauren, Marcus, Diana from HR, Thomas the CFO, and 3 board members he'd never met. He set up his presentation with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and caffeine, then dove in. For 45 minutes, Ryan walked them through his findings from both facilities. He didn't sugarcoat the problems, but he also didn't catastrophize. He presented facts, showed photos, cited industry standards, and offered concrete solutions with cost estimates for each. When he got to the Seattle incident, he made it clear that while the outcome was fortunate, the underlying issues were systemic and needed immediate attention. "So what you're telling us," one of the board members said, an older man with silver hair and a skeptical expression, "is that we need to spend approximately $3 million across all our facilities to fix problems that haven't actually caused any serious incidents?" "With respect, sir," Ryan said, meeting his gaze steadily, "we've been lucky. The Seattle spill could have hospitalized people. The Austin warehouse has fire suppression systems that are 15 years old and haven't been tested in 3. The Chicago office has evacuation routes that would create dangerous bottlenecks in a real emergency. These aren't theoretical problems. They're ticking time bombs. And the cost of preventing disaster is always less than the cost of recovering from one." "But $3 million, the board member began. "Is less than one wrongful death settlement," Ryan interrupted, and felt Lauren stiffen beside him. He just contradicted a board member in front of the executive team, possibly crossing a line he shouldn't have. But he was too tired to be diplomatic. "Sir, I spent 5 years responding to emergencies that people thought would never happen. Office fires that started from faulty wiring that had been fine for years. Building collapses that happened because someone decided structural inspections were too expensive. People died because someone decided that prevention wasn't worth the cost. And I'm telling you right now, if we don't invest in these improvements and something happens, it won't just cost us money. It'll cost lives. And that's not a price I'm willing to pay, even if you are. The silence that followed was deafening. The board member's face had turned red. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Diana was furiously taking notes. Thomas was calculating something on his tablet, probably Ryan's severance package. Lauren stood. Thank you, Ryan, for that comprehensive assessment. I think we have everything we need for now. Would you mind waiting outside while we discuss? Ryan gathered his materials with shaking hands and walked out of the conference room, certain he'd just destroyed his career 2 weeks in. He'd been too harsh, too direct, too honest. He'd challenged a board member in front of everyone. He'd basically accused them of being willing to let people die to save money. Even if he was right, you didn't say things like that in corporate America. There were ways to phrase concerns, political strategies for getting buy-in, diplomatic approaches that didn't involve metaphorically setting the conference table on fire. He sat in the waiting area, his head in his hands, and tried to figure out how he'd explain this to Maddie. How he'd tell his mother that he'd blown it, that he'd had everything and lost it because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. 20 minutes passed. 30. Kara appeared with more coffee, her expression sympathetic. Hanging in there? I think I just got fired, Ryan said. If you did, you went out like a champion, Kara said. I've never seen anyone talk to Charles Whitmore like that. He's probably still trying to process what happened. Is he the silver-haired guy? Yep. Been on the board for 15 years, used to getting his way. You basically told him he was wrong in front of everyone. Ryan groaned. I'm an idiot. Or incredibly brave, Kara said. Time will tell which. The conference room door opened. Lauren stepped out alone, her expression unreadable. Ryan, come with me, please. He followed her to her office, each step feeling like walking to his own execution. She closed the door behind them, and for a long moment, neither spoke. I'm sorry, Ryan said finally. I was out of line. I shouldn't have. You were brilliant, Lauren interrupted. Ryan blinked. What? You were absolutely brilliant. Passionate, direct, uncompromising. You said exactly what needed to be said, in exactly the way it needed to be said. Lauren moved to her window, looking out at the city. Do you know what Charles Whitmore told me after you left? He said, that man either needs to be fired or promoted. There's no middle ground with someone like that. Ryan's heart sank. So I'm fired. No, you idiot, Lauren said, turning to face him with a smile that transformed her whole face. The board just approved your full $3 million budget. All of it. Every facility improvement you recommended, every system upgrade, every training program. Charles said, and I quote, I'd rather be proven wrong by someone who cares that much than proven right after someone dies. Ryan stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. They approved it? All of it? Every penny, Lauren confirmed. You did in one presentation what I've been trying to do for months. Made them understand that safety isn't an expense, it's an investment. That we have a moral obligation to our employees that goes beyond profit margins. She crossed to where Ryan stood frozen by the door and gripped his shoulders. You were everything I hoped you'd be and more. You stood up for what was right, even when it could have cost you everything. That's courage, Ryan. That's integrity. That's exactly why I hired you. Ryan felt his knees go weak. He'd been so certain he'd destroyed everything, and instead, I thought I'd gone too far. You went exactly far enough, Lauren said. Look, there will be times when you need to be more diplomatic. Times when you need to play the political game. But today wasn't one of those times. Today required someone willing to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable. And you did that perfectly. So I still have a job, Ryan said, still trying to catch up with the sudden reversal. You have a job, a $3 million budget, and the board's full support for implementation, Lauren said. Plus, you've earned Charles Whitmore's respect, which is no small thing. He asked me to have you call him next week. He wants to discuss your long-term vision for company-wide safety standards. Ryan sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his legs finally giving out. I think I'm going to be sick. Lauren laughed. That's the adrenaline crash. Here, She poured him water from the carafe on her desk. Drink this. Breathe. You're okay. Better than okay. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. I was so sure I'd ruined everything, Ryan admitted, accepting the water with trembling hands. I couldn't sleep on the flight back because I kept replaying every facility tour, every problem I'd found, trying to figure out how to present it without sounding alarmist. And then I got in that room and I couldn't pretend the problems were smaller than they are. I couldn't soften the truth to make it more palatable. That's what makes you good at this job, Lauren said gently. You can't compromise on safety because you've seen what happens when people do. You've held dying people in your arms. You've seen buildings collapse and families destroyed. That experience, as painful as it was, it gave you a perspective that the rest of us don't have. And that's invaluable. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them. 2 weeks ago, Ryan had been nobody. Now he was here, in the CEO's office, being told he'd just secured $3 million to implement changes that would save lives. It felt impossible. It felt like a dream he'd wake up from any minute. Thank you, Ryan said quietly, for taking a chance on me, for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. You saved my life, Lauren said simply. The least I could do was give you a chance to save others. Is that why you hired me? Ryan asked. Because you felt obligated? I hired you because you're qualified and talented and exactly what this company needs, Lauren said firmly. The fact that you saved my life just made it easier to trust my instincts about you. But Ryan, even if we'd never met in that hotel, even if I'd interviewed you cold with no history between us, I still would have hired you. Maybe for a different position initially, but I would have found a place for you. Because people like you, people who genuinely care about others, who can't walk away from someone in trouble, those people are rare. And when you find them, you hold on to them. Ryan felt something shift in his chest, some piece of himself that had been broken for 2 years finally clicking back into place. He wasn't just someone who'd gotten lucky. He wasn't just a charity case or an obligation. He was someone valuable, someone needed, someone who had earned his place through skill and courage and uncompromising integrity. What happens now? Ryan asked. Now? Lauren smiled. Now you go home, sleep for about 12 hours, spend the weekend with your daughter. Monday morning, you start the real work, planning implementation timelines, coordinating with facility managers, building your team. This was just the beginning, Ryan. The hard part starts now. I'm ready for it, Ryan said, and realized he meant it. For the first time in years, he was genuinely excited about his future instead of just anxiously trying to survive his present. I know you are, Lauren said. Now get out of here before I find more work to pile on you. Ryan stood, then paused at the door. Lauren, can I ask you something? Of course. That morning, in the hotel, do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been there? If I'd been 5 minutes later, or if I'd decided it wasn't my problem? Lauren's expression grew serious. I think about it every day. Every single day. I wake up and remember that I'm only alive because a stranger decided my life was worth risking his own for. That kind of debt, it's not something you can repay, Ryan. It's something you carry with you, something that changes how you see the world. She paused, her eyes bright with emotion. You gave me a second chance at life. I'm spending every day trying to be worthy of that gift. You were always worthy, Ryan said softly. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, Lauren agreed. But I'm grateful anyway. For you, for that moment, for the strange twist of fate that brought you into my life at exactly the right time. She smiled. Now go, before I get emotional and ruin my reputation as a tough CEO. Ryan left her office, walked through the corridor past curious employees, took the elevator down to the lobby, and stepped out into the Chicago afternoon. The sun was shining, the city was alive with movement and possibility, and for the first time since his discharge from the fire department, Ryan Hale felt like he was exactly where he belonged. He pulled out his phone and called his mother. She answered on the first ring, as she always did. Baby, how did it go? Mama, Ryan said, his voice breaking. I did it. I stood up in front of the board and I told them the truth. And instead of firing me, they gave me everything I asked for, $3 million to make people safe. $3 million because they believed in me. His mother's sob of joy came through the phone clear and strong. Oh, Ryan. Oh, my beautiful boy. I knew you could do it. I always knew. I want to take you and Maddie out to dinner, Ryan said. Somewhere nice, somewhere we've never been able to afford before, to celebrate. You don't have to do that, baby. I know I don't have to, Ryan interrupted. I want to. Please, Mama, let me do this. Let me show you that all those years of sacrifice, all those times you went without so I could have what I needed, it wasn't for nothing. It led here to this moment, to this life, where I can finally give back. Okay, his mother said, her voice thick with tears. Okay, baby, we'll celebrate. We'll celebrate everything you've become. That evening, Ryan sat across from his mother and daughter in a restaurant with white tablecloths and prices that didn't make him flinch. Maddie was in her favorite dress, her hair in pigtails, chattering excitedly about the fancy menu and the candles on the table. His mother kept reaching across to squeeze his hand, her eyes shining with pride and love. Make a toast, Daddy, Maddie said, holding up her glass of lemonade. Ryan raised his water glass, looking at the two people who'd stood by him through the worst years of his life. To family, he said. To second chances. To people who help other people, even when it's hard. And to the future, which finally looks brighter than the past. To the future, his mother echoed, tears streaming down her face. To Daddy, Maddie added, because she was 6 and everything was about making her father smile. They clinked glasses, and Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, pure and uncomplicated and real. The road ahead would be challenging. There would be difficult conversations and resistance to change and long nights of work. But for the first time since the warehouse collapse that had ended his firefighting career, Ryan Hale had found his purpose again. He was saving lives, just in a different way, with different tools, in a different arena. Later that night, after taking his mother and Maddie home, after reading 3 bedtime stories and tucking his daughter in with kisses, after promising he'd be there when she woke up, Ryan returned to his small apartment. It was the same shabby space he'd been living in for 2 years, but it felt different now. Temporary instead of permanent. A place he was passing through on his way to somewhere better. His phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Thank you for today. You reminded me why I do this work, why it matters. L. Ryan typed back, thank you for giving me the chance to do work that matters, for seeing who I could be even when I couldn't see it myself. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, coffee. Monday morning? Before the chaos starts, I'd like to hear your implementation plans. I'd like that, Ryan replied. See you Monday. He set his phone aside and walked to his window, looking out at Chicago spreading below him in a carpet of lights. Somewhere out there, in a much nicer apartment with better views, Lauren Carter was probably doing the same thing, looking at the city they both called home, thinking about the strange series of events that had brought them together. A fire, a rescue, an interview, a job. A friendship that had formed in the crucible of crisis and had somehow survived the transition to professional relationship. It was the kind of story that sounded too perfect to be true, the kind where people would suspect embellishment or exaggeration. But it had happened. All of it had really happened. And now Ryan stood on the other side of disaster, having somehow landed in a life better than any he'd imagined possible just 2 weeks ago. He thought about the woman in the hotel room, the one he'd carried through smoke and fire. He thought about the terror in her eyes, the desperate grip of her hands on his shoulders, the moment when they'd emerged into clear air and she'd gasped in a breath that meant life instead of death. He thought about walking into that interview, about the shock of recognition, about Lauren's steady gaze as she'd offered him not just a job but a future. And he thought about Maddie, asleep in her bed with her dollhouse nearby, dreaming whatever dreams 6-year-olds dream, safe and secure and loved. Sometimes, Ryan thought, the universe gets it right. Sometimes the person who needs saving turns out to be the person who can save you right back. Sometimes running into a burning building doesn't just save one life. It changes 2 lives forever, braiding them together in ways neither person expected but both people needed. Ryan Hale had spent his entire adult life running toward danger to help others. He'd never expected that one day someone would run toward him with the same determination, offering rescue from a different kind of fire. The slow burn of desperation and hopelessness that had been consuming him from the inside out. Lauren Carter had saved his life just as surely as he'd saved hers, just in a different way, just when he'd needed it most. And now, standing in his window with the city lights reflecting in his eyes and hope warm in his chest, Ryan understood what his mother had meant when she'd called it justice instead of luck. This was balance. This was the universe finally evening the scales after taking so much for so long. This was what happened when you never stopped being the kind of person who ran into burning buildings. Eventually, someone noticed. Eventually, someone cared. Eventually, the hero got saved too. Ryan closed his eyes and let himself believe, fully and completely, that everything was going to be okay. That he'd found his place, his purpose, his future. That the hard times were finally, truly over. And for once, he was right.